Welcome to another edition of The Story Behind the Car. I'm with Keith, and Keith, you have a 1972 Ford Pantera.
Correct.
And can you tell us about your car?
Sure. This is actually they were made by DeTomaso in Modena, Italy.
Okay.
That was contracted with Ford. Ford had already had a previous engagement with them because they supplied the 302s for the Mangusta, which was the predecessor to this car.
Okay.
But Lee Iacocca wanted a Corvette killer in the 70s. He also wanted a street-legal GT40. That was Ford's ultimate goal. So they got together with DeTomaso, who was a Formula One car designer who built cars for Frank Williams, and said, we want to build a street-legal GT40. So this is what they came up with. It was an evolution of the Mangusta. It's a 351 Cleveland with a 5-speed ZF transaxle. It weighs just over 3,000 pounds, and back in the day it made 330 horsepower.
Holy, I didn't know any of that you just said.
Yeah?
That's amazing. I knew Lee Iacocca was involved with Ford and was
Right.
there for a long time.
Right.
And later went on with Chrysler. But I didn't know he was trying to come up with a Corvette killer. That's amazing.
Right. And 71 and 72 are chrome bumper cars. 73 and 74 have black rubber bumpers on them. And those cars, that's when they ceased to do business with DeTomaso. They still supplied engines, but they no longer imported them and sold them through Lincoln Mercury dealers. From 71 to 74, the only place you could get a Pantera was through a Lincoln Mercury dealer.
Wow. I didn't know that either.
Right, and then here's a little known fact. DeTomaso continued to build the car into the 90s and sold only to the European and Asian markets, and by then they were just a hand-built car. They would make between 30 and 50 a year until they ceased production in the 90s. In the 80s, they evolved to look more like the Countach. They had flared fenders and running boards and a big wing, but this is the purest car. This is what they looked like from the factory back in the early 70s.
Wow. So I have to ask, in the middle of your wheel, you have this design, and I see the same design on the front hood ornament.
Correct. That is actually, supposedly comes from an eye. Mr. DeTomaso's wife was Isabella.
Okay.
And that's the logo of the company. If you look at the floor mats, it's traditionally a blue and white.
Yeah.
And that is for the Argentinian flag from their heritage.
I'm going to get a close-up of that if I can.
Absolutely. Get a shot of the interior and the dash as well. This car has 56,000 original miles, and the dash, the interior, with the exception of the seats and the steering wheel, is 100% original.
And I just looked at that and I thought maybe it's a racetrack.
No.
And that's why I asked.
Right, door panels, everything's
the,
original.
The door handle there. And I'm going to back out. I'll shoot the interior again, but I wanted to get this one and open up the back end.
So this was the luggage compartment back in the day.
Which has a lot of room.
It has a reasonable amount of room, but you can't get golf clubs in there, but that's okay.
Who wants to play golf when you have a car like this, though?
Right. So, really the first mid-engine car that was introduced to the United States in 1971, mid-engine Ford 351 Cleveland, backed up with a 5-speed transaxle, ZF, that's a German transaxle.
Gee, minute Christmas.
Like I said, early on these cars made 330 horsepower. This particular one is a numbers matching motor, but the motor's been out. It's now bored and stroked to 408, making just under 550 horsepower. This car, over 50 years of evolution of the Pantera, that we've figured out how to fix things. Like back in the day, they overheated, they didn't stop well, they vapor locked, and all of that's been cured on this particular car. They had Lucas Girling brake system back in the day, and now this one's been updated to Wellwood. The cooling system, it was steel tubes that ran through the front of the bottom of the car all the way to the front to a regular copper radiator. All that's been changed. Now that's stainless steel to a big aluminum high flow radiator. Updated water pump, updated AC. This is the air conditioning condenser coil, the radiator for the cars up front, and it's huge. If it's not been changed with stainless steel, it's definitely been touched. The electrical system's all been updated. It's now got a 750 carburetor sitting on top of a spread bore intake so that we can isolate it from the heat, and that takes care of the vapor lock issue. So now it's, with all that extra horsepower, it's just like driving a really big go-kart.
So I want to ask a couple of questions because, and this is not an insult.
No, sir.
But you have a tendency to go on and on, which
is
great.
I apologize for that.
No, you've got amazing knowledge. But I just wanted to ask a couple of simple questions, because the third question is the one I really want you to talk about. So I'm assuming that's where you add your fuel.
Correct.
And then this is your radiator overflow?
Correct.
Okay. So can you explain the transmission? Because when I look at that, I just think, oh my gosh.
It is a bit confusing. Obviously, this is your bell housing, this is your clutch.
Yes.
It's got a hydraulic clutch slave cylinder here.
Okay.
Okay. And then here's your gearbox with the rear end. And then because it's what's called a transaxle, it's trans back to these giant half shafts that come out and go directly to the wheels. This is actually the same gearbox that was in the Ford GT40 race car. For the Pantera application, it's actually flipped over 180 degrees to get it to fit in the car.
Holy crap. And it looks like, it reminds me like a 32 Roadster or a 32 Ford.
Right.
Had that same kind of...
Well, and if you look at like 1960s and especially 1970s Indy cars or Can-Am cars, you will see a very similar arrangement out the back end.
Yes.
In fact, you know, in a modern Indy car, they would have a hole in here, and the input shaft would go all the way through, and they would put an electric gun starter in.
That's how they would start it. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Amazing.
And the exhaust has all been, it's all the original configuration, but it's now big bore, and it's all stainless steel with the tips to replicate what the ANSA system was originally.
Okay. And I want to get your rear bumper, because you were saying that the 71 and 72 had the chrome.
Correct. And then when they went to 73 and 4, it was a large black bumper that went all the way across the car, and it was to satisfy California bumper crash.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a 15-mile-an-hour deal or whatever it was, but they have big springs in them. It added about 150 pounds to the car as well.
Yeah, more safety crap.
Correct.
And I love the badging.
Yeah, and that's, once again, this is the way it would have come. In fact, like this undercoating, this is all original from the 70s. This is the way it left Italy, and they were all brought into the port and unloaded and crated and sent to the Lincoln Mercury dealers.
And is this original?
Actually, originally, this was just a steel bar.
Okay.
And it was connected from this point to this point, because this is a monocoque car. It doesn't really have a frame.
Okay.
So your rear fenders, your roof, and your front fenders are all welded together, and that's the structure of the car. And that is a stiffener, and this is just an upgraded one that's adjustable, and it actually helps adjust the upper control arm position for camber settings as well. Amazing. It also keeps the car a lot more stiff than the original steel one, because the steel one would bow and flex, which would actually knock the paint off the corners back here.
Oh, wow.
On the trunk and the deck, because the car would wiggle so much. So that helps to control that. Correct.
Very nice.
We'll go up front here, and you can see you get another shot of the inside.
There's the Argentine flag.
Yep. And now the seats are an aftermarket seat.
Yes.
They are really hold you in and a lot more comfortable. The original seats are very much like sitting in a leather wheelbarrow. They're very much like just a bucket. And
yeah, you hit the
not that that's bad. And then the other thing, the gated shifter was a classic 70s trademark of DeTomaso. At the time, the only other company that may have had a gated shifter was Ferrari.
And can you explain what a gated shifter is?
Well, we actually have little slots in there.
Okay.
As opposed to like driving a Chevrolet. Like for instance, we have Corvettes, and my son has a Chevelle, and all of that. You know, sometimes they talk about or like an old Volkswagen Bug being a mush box. You know, you got to kind of try to find it.
Yeah.
Well, that's very, very precise and very exact. Never missed shift with that.
And your dashboard is really interesting looking. It has the gauges and then the toggle switches, I guess you would call that.
Correct. Window switches are in the middle, all the 4 gauges, and then the air conditioning control, and that's all the factory setup. Another unique situation is all the cars came from Europe with no radio.
Okay.
And the Lincoln Mercury dealers would install the radio, and it was a vertical radio.
Yeah.
But with the noise of the motor, you can't ever hear the radio anyway. So I'll probably take that out and put back the factory delete plate.
Yes.
So
the engine sounds so much better.
Correct. And then you got a little space up here. But here's the big Pantera Performance version radiator with electric cooling fans. The original radiator in the Pantera was a copper, and they had struggled with cooling issues.
Okay.
And then we have stainless steel tubes going from front to back to the motor to feed the motor and keep it circulating.
And how does it run today?
It runs outstanding, and went to a car show last July when it was over 100 degrees with the air conditioning on, and never an overheating problem.
Wow. This is such an amazing car.
Is this a European car or?
DeTomaso Pantera, made in Italy.
Oh, DeTomaso, okay.
Imported through Ford to Lincoln Mercury dealers from 71 to 74.
Because DeTomaso, they were an outfitting company, or?
They only built cars, and they built race cars and street cars.
Yeah, because I've seen I've heard of it.
Anything else we should mention before we wrap things up,
I don't
Keith?
know. I had one back in the day, and I loved the car, and when I found this one and it reminded me of my youth, and I had to have it. So
Yeah.
this one's going to stay in the garage for a long time.
And how long have you had this one?
I secured this car in January of 22.
Okay.
And the car wasn't completely done at the time. It was close, but it needed a lot of detail work and a lot of tuning work. The car had undergone a 6-year restoration, and the gentleman that had it was he was a tall gentleman, and he had a bad back, and unfortunately these are made for short people. If you look back in the inside, the footwell is on an angle because your front wheel well is all the way back here. So the foot box is very narrow.
Yes.
And
oh yeah.
I'm 5'7", and I've driven a race car my whole life, and I fit just fine. But if you get like some of my larger friends, they can't even go for a ride. They just don't fit in this car. So
one last thing I want to ask,
yes,
Keith. You have these plates here.
Yes.
And can you explain what the significance of that information is?
This plate right here has a number on it, and that number actually matches the block casting number, which is right there.
Okay.
So that is our engine identification code plate.
Yes.
And then this is just a federalization plate. It's got emission control information and some general information, and these were on all the cars that left. You'll see here it says somewhere on here SPA, which is coming out of the European Italy at the time, and then California confirms to US EPA and California regulations as of 1972. So that was one of the federation plates to get the cars from Italy back into the United States.
Yes. Well, Keith, thank you so much for sharing your car and telling us the story behind your car.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I just shot Keith's car, and I didn't even ask him to start it up, and that was a mistake, but he's starting it up now.
He's starting it up.
Yes.
Oh boy, here we go. Oh no. I told you I heard a noise when I left the driveway. Hate to have you push me on video. I know what the noise was, Daryl.
Go ahead.
You're good.